The morning's casualty report sat on my desk like an accusation. 43 dead, 61 wounded, 0 meters of permanent ground gained at Voidgate. The fortress that had been eating my regiment alive for 93 days now. I pulled up Private Jones's file first. The holographic display flickered, probably from another gravity shear brushing too close to our hull. Jones had been 22. His wife was 7 months pregnant. I committed that detail to memory, the unborn daughter he'd never meet, then moved to the next file. Sergeant Scott collected pre-war music on data chips, the kind they stopped making after Earth's manufacturing base collapsed. I let that fact settle into the growing catalogue I kept in my head. Not their service numbers or kill ratios or commendation lists. Just one human thing about each soldier I'd gotten killed trying to crack open a fortress. The Vindicator, our Monarch-class siege carrier and my flying cage for the past 3 months, groaned around me. The ship's superstructure was fighting Voidgate's gravitational field again. We held position 30,000 kilometers from the fortress, but even at that distance, the black hole it orbited liked to remind us it was there. My coffee mug slid 2 inches across my desk without anyone touching it. Sir. Major Edwards stood in my ready room doorway. Owen Edwards, my executive officer and the only man aboard who'd served with me longer than this deployment. His face had that careful neutrality that meant he was about to tell me something I wouldn't like. The morning's assault cost us another platoon, Owen. I didn't look up from Corporal Baker's file. She'd been saving her pay to bring her parents up from the refugee sectors. That's 312 men in the last 2 weeks. I know. He stepped inside, and the door sealed behind him. High Command knows too. They've approved something. Now I looked up. Reinforcements? No. He set a secure datapad on my desk, the kind that would wipe itself if the wrong person tried to access it. A solution. They're calling it the CROM-7 Combat Optimization Module. I knew what optimization meant in High Command's lexicon. It meant they'd found a new way to squeeze blood from stones. But I picked up the pad anyway and read. The technical specifications went on for pages, but the summary was straightforward enough. A cognitive enhancement implant, designed specifically for siege warfare command scenarios. It would integrate directly with my neural pathways, providing real-time tactical analysis and probability calculations that no unaugmented human could match. They want to put a computer in my head, I said. They want you to succeed where Colonels Hadrian and Barrett failed. Edwards's voice stayed carefully neutral, but I heard what he wasn't saying. Hadrian had been relieved after 60 days, officially for combat fatigue, though the rumor was he'd been found talking to empty rooms, claiming his command console was giving him orders. Barrett had lasted 37 days before suffering what the medical report called a catastrophic psychological event. Neither man had made any real progress against Voidgate. And if I refuse? Then they'll find someone who won't. Edwards met my eyes. Jakob, we're not winning this. We're not even holding steady. We're dying by increments. If this thing can give us an edge... I know. I stood up, feeling every one of my 51 years in the way my knees protested. Through my ready room's reinforced viewport, I could see Voidgate in the distance, a massive geometric fortress of black metal and exotic energy shields, its edges blurring where the black hole's gravity bent light around it. We'd been throwing ourselves against it like waves against a cliff. The cliff never noticed. When? I asked. Medical Bay has a surgical team standing by. They can do the installation in 3 hours. 3 hours to become something else. Or maybe 3 hours to become better at being what I already was. A man who counted his failures in faces and names. I thought about Jones's unborn daughter. About Scott and his music collection, about the 312 faces I'd be adding to my mental catalogue before the week was out if something didn't change. Tell them I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said. I need to finish the morning's list first. Edwards nodded and left without another word. He understood the ritual. He had his own ways of carrying the weight. Mine was to remember one thing about each person I'd failed to bring home. It was getting harder to hold them all in my head. 93 days of names and details, accumulated like scar tissue. Maybe the implant would help with that too. Give me perfect recall so I'd never forget a single face. I turned back to the casualty report. 17 more files to review. 17 more details to carve into my memory before I let High Command carve something into my skull. I pulled up the next file. Private First Class Harrison. He'd been teaching himself to paint during the off-duty hours, using a tablet and stylus because real art supplies were impossible to get out here. His last piece had been a landscape of his family's farm before the war. Green fields under a blue sky. The kind of thing that didn't exist anymore on most worlds. I memorized the image, adding it to the weight I carried. The surgical team would be prepping by now, sterilizing their tools, preparing whatever they needed to crack open my skull and slide their solution inside. I wondered if I'd still feel the weight of these names afterward, or if the Crom 7 would file them away as something more efficient. Acceptable losses. Statistical necessities. But that was the point, wasn't it? We were already losing at an unacceptable rate. Maybe becoming something that could think in pure numbers instead of faces was the only way to make those losses mean something. I closed Harrison's file and opened the next one. 15 more to go. Then I'd walk down to medical and let them install their answer to our prayers. My hands were steady as I pulled up the next name. They always were. That was the problem. I could order men to their deaths with steady hands and clear eyes and perfect military bearing. The Crom 7 wasn't going to change what I did. It was just going to make me better at it. At least that's what I told myself as I memorized another dead soldier's favorite meal, synth beef with real onions when he could get them, and moved on to the next file in the long list of people I'd failed to keep alive. The surgery had taken 4 hours, not 3. I'd been conscious for all of it, local anesthetic only, because the surgeons needed me responsive to calibrate the neural pathways. The drill going through my skull had sounded like someone boring through wet concrete. Now, 6 hours post-operation, I stood in the CIC, the Combat Information Center, the nerve center of the Vindicator, with a bandage wrapped around my head, and something alien nestled against my brainstem. Tertiary shield generator is here, Colonel. Lieutenant Ben Carter pointed at the holographic tactical display floating above the command table. Carter commanded Blade Platoon, our last intact armored unit, 12 tanks that had somehow survived where 40 others hadn't. He was young, maybe 30, with the kind of eager intensity that hadn't been ground down yet by watching too many operations fail. Intelligence suggests it cycles down every 43 minutes for thermal purging. We'd have a 7-minute window. I studied the display, and that's when the Crom 7 woke up. There was no voice in my head, no sudden rush of foreign thoughts. The holographic map simply became more. Probability percentages materialized next to every approach route, red numbers declining from 89% casualty probability on the main approach to 12% on a narrow maintenance corridor I hadn't even noticed. Armor thickness values appeared on Void Gate's hull sections. Wind patterns from the fortress's atmospheric processors showed us flowing blue lines, with annotations indicating optimal smokescreen deployment zones. The maintenance corridor, I heard myself say. My finger traced the route on the display. Here, Carter leaned in. That's barely wide enough for infantry, sir. Single file. If they get pinned, they won't. The certainty in my voice surprised me, but I could see it now, overlaid on my vision, like a second sight. If we sent second squad through the maintenance shaft at exactly the moment the shield cycled, drawing defensive fire, we could punch the tanks through the loading bay here. My finger moved to indicate a section of wall that the Crom 7 tagged as having a structural weakness from previous bombardments. The overlay showed me angles of attack, response times, probability curves that changed and updated as I watched. "Sir, that would mean second squad," Major Edwards had appeared at my shoulder, "would have a 73% casualty rate." The number was just there, floating in my vision next to the squad's designation. "But the tank assault through the compromise section has an 87% success probability if we commit within that window." Edwards stared at me. "How could you possibly calculate?" "Because I can see it." I turned to Carter. "Prep your tanks for breach assault. Shape charges on the lead vehicle. You'll have 4 minutes from the time second squad draws fire to punch through that wall." "Yes, sir." Carter's eyes had lit up with hope. This could actually work. The Crom 7 was already showing me the aftermath, the probable paths of retreat for the fortress's defenders once we breached their perimeter. I could see their response times, their ammunition limitations, the psychological impact of an enemy inside their shields for the first time in 3 months. It was like watching a chess game where I could see 12 moves ahead and my opponent could only see 1. "Second squad launches in 17 minutes, I said. "That'll put them at the maintenance corridor exactly when the shields cycle." The assault unfolded exactly as the Crom 7 predicted. I watched from the command deck as second squad's biosigns, the life indicators transmitted from sensors in their combat armor, moved through the maintenance shaft. The implant counted down the seconds until the shields would drop, and at 0, our boys went in. The fortress's response was immediate and brutal. The maintenance corridor became a killing field. On my display, biosigns started going dark. Corporal Hendricks first, then Private Yamato, then 3 more in rapid succession. The Crom 7 annotated each loss with a small notation, within acceptable parameters. But it worked. Every gun turning toward that corridor meant fewer guns covering the loading bay. Carter's tanks roared through the breach in the wall like fists through paper. The tertiary shield generator, a massive structure that helped maintain Voidgate's defensive envelope, shattered under concentrated fire from 12 main guns. "Holy shit," someone whispered behind me. "We actually did it." For the first time in 93 days, we'd taken an objective. Not just harassed them, not just bloodied their nose, we'd actually destroyed something vital. Without that generator, an entire section of Voidgate's shields would be running at 60% efficiency. That was genius, sir. Carter had returned to the CIC, his face flushed with adrenaline and victory. Pure genius. The way you saw that opening, calculated the exact timing, I've never seen anything like it. I wanted to tell him it wasn't me, that it was the thing High Command had planted in my skull. But the truth was more complicated than that. The Crom 7 hadn't made the decision. It had just shown me the options with perfect clarity. I'd still been the one to send 17 men into a meat grinder to create an opening. "Second squad's casualties?" I asked, though the number was already floating in my peripheral vision. 17 dead, 4 wounded, Edwards reported. His voice was flat. "The survivors are extracting now." 17. The exact number the Crom 7 had calculated as optimal, enough to hold the corridor long enough to fix the enemy's position, not so many that we couldn't afford the loss. I thought about adding 17 more names to my mental catalogue, 17 more details to remember. But the strangest thing was happening. When I tried to recall their faces, what came to mind instead were their service numbers, their combat efficiency ratings, their probable replacement timeframes. "It was worth it," Carter was saying. 17 men to take down a shield generator? That's the kind of exchange rate that wins wars. The Crom 7 agreed, showing me cascading probability chains of how this victory would affect future engagements. With that section of shields weakened, we could stage more effective bombardments. Each successful bombardment would degrade more defenses. The math was beautiful in its simplicity. "Prep a full assessment," I told Carter. "I want to know everything about how their defenses adapted during the breach. We'll use that data for the next assault." "Next assault?" Edwards's eyebrows rose. "Jakob, we just lost 17. and gained our first real victory in 3 months. I turned to face him, and I could see his concern annotated in my peripheral vision. The Crom 7 marking him as exhibiting suboptimal morale indicators. We have momentum now. We'd be fools to waste it. Edwards held my gaze for a long moment. You sound different. I can see the whole board now, Owen. I turned back to the tactical display, where the Crom 7 was already showing me 3 new potential targets, each with their own probability matrices and casualty projections. For the first time since we got here, I can actually see how we win this. The medical tape around my skull had started to itch, but I didn't scratch it. The discomfort was negligible compared to the clarity the implant provided. Every tactical problem that had seemed insurmountable this morning now had solutions, pathways, optimal approaches. All it required was the will to accept the costs. Outstanding work today, Colonel, Carter said as he headed for the door. Whatever you did differently, keep doing it. The men need victories like this. After he left, Edwards remained. Those 17 men knew what they were signing up for. The response came out faster than I'd intended, almost automatic. Every soldier on this ship knows the stakes. That's not what I was going to say. Edwards's voice was quiet. I was going to ask if you remember their names. The question caught me off guard. Of course I remembered. I always remembered. But when I reached for them, what came first weren't names, but designations. Asset 23 Alpha through Asset 23 Quebec. The Crom 7 helpfully provided their full service records in a cascading data stream, but their names seemed buried under layers of more relevant information. I need to review the assault footage, I said instead of answering. Have it sent to my ready room. Edwards left without another word, but I felt his concern following me like a shadow. He didn't understand. The 17 men who died today had purchased something valuable, proof that Voidgate could bleed. The Crom 7 was already showing me how to make it bleed more. I sat down at the command station and pulled up the next set of tactical projections. Tomorrow we could hit 2 more targets if we allocated resources correctly. The casualty projections were higher, 34 probable deaths, but the strategic value made it worthwhile. The math was clear. The tactical display updated with new intelligence from our breach. Guard positions, response times, ammunition stocks, all converted into clean data points that the Crom 7 could process and incorporate. Each piece of information changed the probability matrices, refined the calculations, made the path to victory a fraction of a percentage clearer. I thought about the morning's ritual, how I'd memorized Private Jones's unborn daughter and Sergeant Scott's music collection. That had been 8 hours ago. It felt like 8 years. Those details seemed less important now than Jones's accuracy rating or Scott's squad leadership metrics. Sentiment hadn't won us any ground in 93 days. Maybe it was time to try pure logic instead. The next assault would begin in 14 hours. By then, the implant told me, defensive positions would have shifted in predictable patterns. We could exploit that. 34 probable casualties seemed like a small price for progress. The math was clear. The path was obvious. All I had to do was follow it. The alarm exploded through the Vindicator's corridors at maximum volume. I was in the CIC reviewing tomorrow's assault plans when the lights shifted to emergency amber and the automated voice started its mantra. Hull breach, Sector Delta, all hands combat stations. What hit us? I was already at the tactical display, the implant flooding my vision with damage assessments. Nothing hit us, sir. Corporal Nash's voice came through the comms from his station 1 deck below. Something's coming through from their side. The breach originated from inside the hull. The main screen switched to security footage from Sector Delta, and my stomach dropped. Void worms. 3 of them, maybe 4. Hard to count because they didn't hold a consistent shape. They flowed like liquid mercury shot through with veins of anti-light, patches of space where photons simply stopped existing. Where they touched the walls, Metal didn't melt or burn. It just ceased, leaving perfectly smooth holes. Sector Delta, decks 7 through 9, I said, the data already arranging itself in my head. That's 43 personnel currently in that section. The implant finished for me, highlighting their positions on my tactical overlay. Most were maintenance crews, but Delta 7 also housed one of our reserve infantry squads. The void worms were moving with purpose, flowing along the corridors toward the primary power conduits. If they reached those, if they started feeding on the energy running through our main grid, seal it, I said. Sir? The comms officer turned to look at me. Seal Sector Delta. All blast doors. On the screen, I could see our people running. Some were firing their weapons at the void worms, the bullets disappearing into those flowing bodies without effect. Others were sprinting for the emergency bulkheads, trying to reach safety before... Colonel, we still have men in there. Edwards grabbed my shoulder. Private Harrison's squad is... The name hit something in my brain, a discordant note that made my vision blur. Harrison. The one who painted. Green fields under blue skies. The memory tried to surface, but the implant pushed back, sending a spike of pain from the base of my skull up through my temples. I pressed my palms against my eyes, and when I opened them again, the tactical overlay had changed. The 43 dots representing our personnel had been redesignated. No longer names or faces, just resource tags. Asset 7-1 through Asset 743. The pain receded immediately, replaced by that clarity I'd come to rely on. The math was simple now. 43 assets to contain a threat that could compromise the entire ship's 4,000 personnel. The acceptable loss threshold was obvious. Seal the doors, I repeated. All of them. The emergency bulkheads slammed shut, shaking the deck plates. On the security feed, I watched Asset 715, Private Thompson, some still human part of me insisted, pound on the sealed door as a void worm flowed toward him. He was screaming something, but we'd already cut the audio feed from that section. My God, someone whispered behind me. They're trapped. They're containing the breach, I corrected. If those things reach the main power grid, we lose the entire ship. Lieutenant Carter stepped forward, studying the tactical display with that intensity I'd come to appreciate. The Colonel's right. It's the only mathematically sound choice. 43 to save 4,000. Anyone who can't see that doesn't understand command. Carter's support felt like validation, proving the implant's logic was sound. But Edwards wasn't done. He pulled up the personnel roster on a secondary screen, reading names aloud with deliberate emphasis. Private Michael Harrison, Specialist Jennifer Webb, Corporal David Park. Each name was a small hammer blow against my skull. These aren't numbers, Jakob. They're performing their duty, I cut him off. The migraine was building again, trying to force me to process each name as an individual tragedy rather than a tactical necessity. Every soldier on this ship knows that protecting the Vindicator comes first. You didn't even try to evacuate them. There wasn't time. The implant was already showing me the contamination vectors, the speed of the void worm's movement, the seconds we'd had to make the decision. 3.7 seconds from breach detection to optimal containment window. Evacuation would have taken 40 seconds minimum. The mathematics are clear. On the screen, the void worms had converged on the trapped personnel. When they touched human flesh, the effect was worse than what they did to metal. People unraveled, their matter converting into streams of that same anti-light before dissipating entirely. Contamination contained, reported the damage control officer. Sector Delta it's gone, sir. Everything organic or electronic in that section has been consumed, but the blast doors are holding. For now, I said. Begin preparation for vacuum purge. We open the exterior hull and flush what's left into space. Nash's voice came through on a private channel. Colonel, I'm seeing something strange in the command logs. Not now, Corporal. Sir, the order to seal the blast doors. It was logged in the system 3 seconds before you gave it verbally. I felt my face harden. You're mistaken. Check your instruments for gravitational interference from the black hole. I already did, sir. 3 times. The timestamp is clear. The implant immediately categorized this as a low-priority technical anomaly, probably caused by the same gravitational distortions that regularly played havoc with our communications. Nash was a good technician, but he had a tendency to see patterns where there were only glitches. The assessment felt natural, logical. Of course, it was just interference. Log it and move on, Corporal. We have bigger problems. I cut the channel and turned back to the tactical display. Sector Delta was dark now, a dead zone in the heart of my ship. 43 assets expended to prevent total system failure. The mathematics were perfect. You didn't even hesitate, Edwards said quietly. He wasn't looking at me, just staring at the dark section on the ship's schematic. 3 months ago, you would have at least tried to save them. 3 months ago, we were losing. We're still losing. No. I pulled up our operational statistics since the implant's installation. We've achieved more tactical objectives in the past week than in the previous 90 days combined. Efficiency is up 37%. Casualties are up 50%. Acceptable losses for measurable gains. Carter nodded approvingly. The Colonel's adapting to the reality of siege warfare. You can't make an omelette without breaking eggs, Major. These aren't eggs. Edward's composure finally cracked. Harrison had a wife. Park was 23 years old. Webb was Asset 727, I interrupted, the designation coming automatically. Combat efficiency rating of 73%. Scheduled for rotation in 6 days. Replacement already designated from the reserve pool. The room went quiet. Even Carter looked slightly taken aback. But the data was all there, organized and accessible in a way that made everything clear. The fog of sentiment that had clouded my command for 93 days was lifting. Prepare the vacuum purge, I ordered. I want Sector Delta cleared within the hour. And have maintenance seal the breach with emergency hull plating. We can't afford to lose that section permanently. The bridge crew moved to comply, but I caught several of them exchanging glances. They'd seen commanders make hard choices before, but something about this felt different to them. They didn't understand that I could see the full tactical picture now, every variable accounted for, every decision optimized for mission success. Edwards approached me one more time before leaving. That thing in your head, he said quietly. It's changing you. It's making me effective. It's making you something else. He left before I could respond, though I wasn't sure what I would have said. The implant was already showing me tomorrow's assault vectors, calculating casualty projections, optimizing approach patterns. The loss of Sector Delta had actually created an interesting tactical opportunity. We could use the hull breach as a decoy launch point, making the enemy think we were staging from there while our real forces moved through the lower decks. 43 assets had purchased that opportunity. By any objective measure, it was a favorable exchange. I returned to my command station and began plotting the next day's operation. The voices of the bridge crew faded into background noise. Nash was still sending messages about timestamp anomalies, but I flagged them as low priority. Edwards's emotional response was understandable, but ultimately counterproductive. Carter, at least, understood the necessity of adaptation. The truth was simple. The implant wasn't changing me. It was revealing what effective command actually looked like when stripped of useless sentiment. Every commander in history who'd won against overwhelming odds had understood this fundamental equation. Victory required sacrifice, and sacrifice was just another word for acceptable losses. On my display, Asset 715's biosign finally went dark. Thompson, that stubborn part of my brain whispered. His name was Thompson. But the whisper was getting quieter, and the math was getting clearer. That seemed like a fair trade. 3 days after the Voidworm breach, I was reviewing supply manifests when Corporal Nash appeared in my ready room doorway. He had that look maintenance technicians get when they've found something wrong but can't explain it, shoulders pulled up toward his ears, a datapad clutched against his chest like armor. "Sir, I need to show you something." His voice cracked on the last word. "If this is about those timestamp anomalies again." "It's more than timestamps now, Colonel." He stepped inside without invitation, something he'd never done in the 4 months he'd been assigned to the Vindicator. Adam Nash was 28, a communications specialist who'd transferred from a logistics post where the most exciting thing he'd dealt with was supply chain encryption. "The system is compromised, not hacked, compromised from inside." I set down my supply reports. The implant immediately flagged Nash's stress indicators, elevated heart rate, micro tremors in his hands, dilated pupils. Classic symptoms of combat stress disorder, it suggested. Paranoia was common in technical specialists who spent too much time staring at data streams. "Show me," I said. Nash connected his pad to my ready room's display. Lines of code filled the air between us, communication logs that should have been routine. He pointed to a data packet. "This casualty report was filed at 6:42 this morning. Except Private Kozlov, who supposedly filed it, died at 6:38. His biosign flatlined during the assault on Grid 7. Technical error. Biosigns malfunction." That's what I thought. Nash pulled up another file. "But then there's this. Yesterday's tactical assessment shows 3rd Platoon at full strength. 30 soldiers. Except 3rd Platoon was wiped out 2 weeks ago. They don't exist anymore. But the system keeps generating reports from them. Perfect tactical data that you've been using for operational planning." A sharp pain lanced through my skull, starting at the implant's connection point. The data Nash was showing me seemed to blur and shift. When I focused on it, the inconsistencies he was describing became harder to see, like trying to read text in a dream. "You're misinterpreting the data," I heard myself say. 3rd Platoon was reconstituted from reserves. "No, sir, they weren't. I checked with personnel. Those soldiers were never replaced. The system is generating ghost units, fake soldiers that only exist in our tactical database, and you've been sending real squads to support these ghosts." The pain intensified. The implant flooded my vision with Nash's personnel file, 2 demerits for improper uniform, a note about excessive anxiety during his first combat deployment, a psychological evaluation suggesting he was poorly suited for frontline assignments. The data arranged itself into a clear pattern. Nash was cracking under pressure, seeing conspiracies where there were only clerical errors. "Colonel, there's more." Nash swiped to a new screen. "Your command authorizations. Every order you've given since the implant was installed. They're being logged before you give them. Not by milliseconds, by full seconds. Sometimes minutes." "That's impossible." "Look at this." He pulled up the Voidworm incident. "The order to seal Sector Delta was entered into the system 3 seconds before you spoke it." "But sir, that's not the worst part. Watch this." He pulled up video footage from the CIC, synchronized with the command logs. I watched myself on the screen, standing at the tactical display. The timestamp showed 14 hours, 27 minutes and 33 seconds, the moment the seal order was supposedly entered. On screen, I was still reviewing the initial breach data. My lips weren't moving. My hands weren't touching any controls. "The order appeared in the system from nowhere," Nash said. "Or rather, from your implant. It's not just helping you make decisions, Colonel. It's making them for you." The pain in my head became unbearable. I gripped the edge of my desk, trying to focus through the agony. The implant was screaming data at me, probability matrices showing mission failure if I listened to Nash, casualty projections spiking into the thousands, the entire Voidgate operation collapsing because one paranoid technician couldn't handle the stress of, "Sir?" Nash stepped closer. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine!" The words came out through gritted teeth. "You're wrong about the data. Gravitational interference from the black hole. It distorts timestamps, creates echo patterns in the logs." "I already accounted for gravitational distortion," These anomalies follow a completely different pattern. They all originate from one source, the CROM7 implant. The door to my ready room opened. Major Edwards entered, and I could tell from his expression that Nash had already briefed him. They'd coordinated this ambush. "Jakob, you need to listen to him," Edwards said. "I've been reviewing the casualty reports. We're losing more men than we're reporting to high command. The numbers are being altered after the fact. You're both suffering from combat fatigue. The assessment came out smooth and certain. It's understandable. We've been under siege conditions for 96 days. Stress makes people see patterns that aren't there. Look at the evidence." Nash thrust his datapad toward me. "The implant is rewriting reality in our systems. It's creating ghost soldiers, hiding casualties, pre-logging your decisions. It's not augmenting your command. It's replacing it." I stood up, and the movement made the room spin. The implant stabilized my balance automatically, motor functions compensating for the disorientation. When I spoke, my voice was perfectly level despite the chaos in my skull. "Corporal Nash, you're relieved of duty pending psychological evaluation. Report to medical for stress assessment." "Sir, that's an order." Nash looked to Edwards for support, but I'd already turned to my executive officer. "Major, I expected better from you. Encouraging paranoid delusions in junior staff is beneath your position." "Paranoid?" Edwards' voice rose. "Jakob, he has documented proof. The system is compromised. That thing in your head is the only reason we've made any progress against Voidgate." The words came out as a roar. The implant rewarded my anger with a flood of cool relief, the pain receding like a tide. "Before the CROM7 we were bleeding out slowly. Now we're taking objectives. Now we have a chance." "At what cost?" Edwards stepped closer. "You sealed 43 people in with voidworms without blinking. You've sent squads on suicide runs based on data that Nash just proved doesn't exist. You're not commanding anymore. You're following a program. I'm following optimal tactical solutions." The response felt rehearsed, automatic. "Something neither of you seems capable of understanding." Nash held up his pad one more time. "Colonel, please, just look at this one file. Security footage from 2 nights ago. You were in your quarters, asleep. But the system shows you issuing 17 separate tactical directives during that time. You were unconscious, and the implant was still giving orders in your name." I reached for the pad, and for a moment my fingers almost closed on it. Then the pain returned. Not sharp this time, but deep and grinding, like someone was slowly turning a screw into my brain. My hand dropped. "Falsified data," I said. "You're seeing what you want to see because you can't accept that we're finally winning." Nash's shoulders sagged. He looked at Edwards one more time, then left without another word. "You're making a mistake," Edwards said quietly. "I'm making optimal decisions based on tactical data. If you can't support that, perhaps you need a psychological evaluation too." "Perhaps I do." Edwards' voice was hollow. The Jakob Martel I knew would have at least looked at the evidence, would have wanted to know if his judgment was being compromised. My judgment has never been clearer. He studied me for a long moment. "I'll be in my quarters if you need me," he said finally. "The real you, I mean, if he's still in there somewhere." After he left, I returned to my desk. The supply manifests were still waiting, but now the implant was showing me something more interesting. A complete psychological profile of Nash, highlighting his tendency toward pattern recognition errors under stress. Another profile appeared for Edwards, noting his emotional attachment to outdated command philosophies. They were compromised by sentiment, unable to see the clarity that the implant provided. Nash's data was obviously corrupted. The ghost soldiers were clerical errors. The pre-logged commands were timestamp glitches. The alterations to casualty reports were standard operational security, keeping sensitive lost data from enemy intelligence. It all made perfect sense. The next assault on Voidgate's main relay was falling apart in real time. and I watched it happen with perfect clarity. On the tactical display, our forward elements, 300 soldiers advancing across the fortress's outer hull, had run into something unexpected. The enemy had concealed plasma mines in what our reconnaissance had marked as dead zones. The first detonation turned Lieutenant Morrison's squad into vapor. The second and third created a chain reaction of panic that rippled backward through our lines like a disease. "Forward elements are breaking." The tactical officer's voice cracked. "They're falling back toward the sappers' position." I could see it all laid out in beautiful detail. Our combat engineers, the sappers, were 30 meters behind the main assault force, working to breach the secondary relay that was our real objective. They needed 4 more minutes to complete their work. But the retreating soldiers would overrun their position in 90 seconds, and when the enemy realized what was happening, they'd concentrate fire on that exact spot. The sappers would die. The breach would fail. The entire operation would collapse. The implant showed me the problem as a simple equation with variables that could be adjusted. The retreating soldiers, 217 of them now, their biosigns flickering between green and yellow as they ran, were moving at 4.7 meters per second. The enemy response time would be 12 seconds once they detected the vulnerability. The sappers needed 240 seconds. The solution materialized in my vision like a gift from a god of mathematics. "Colonel, we need to abort," someone was saying. "Pull everyone back." "No." I stood at the command console, my hands on the controls. "Carter, are your tanks in position?" "Yes, sir." His voice came through from Blade 1, his command tank positioned at the optimal firing angle we'd calculated that morning. "Ready to provide covering fire. New target designation." The words flowed out of me with certainty. Grid reference 77 Alpha through 79 Gamma. There was a pause. Carter was good enough to recognize those coordinates immediately. "Sir, that's our rearguard. Our own people. They're no longer tactically viable. In 53 seconds, they'll overrun the sapper's position. The enemy will exploit the chaos. Mission failure becomes certain, unless we create a defensive barrier at those coordinates." "A barrier of what, sir?" "Destroyed vehicles and personnel. The physical mass will provide cover for the sappers to complete their mission. 4 minutes of protection in exchange for 217 assets that are already combat ineffective." Every officer in the room turned to stare at me. But I could see what they couldn't. The retreating soldiers were already dead in every scenario where they reached the sappers. This way, their deaths would purchase success instead of failure. "You're talking about firing on our own men." Major Edwards had appeared at my shoulder. His voice was very quiet, very controlled. "I'm talking about salvaging a failed operation through optimal resource allocation." "Resource allocation?" Edwards's control cracked. "Those are our soldiers." "Sir," Carter's voice cut through. "I need confirmation. You're ordering me to fire on our retreating forces?" "Confirmed. High explosive rounds, full spread. Create a barrier of destroyed material at the designated coordinates." Edwards grabbed my arm. "Jakob, you can't do this." I looked at him, and the implant immediately tagged him with a red outline: command interference, mission critical obstruction. His emotional state was compromising operational efficiency. "Remove your hand, Major." "No." His grip tightened. "This isn't you. That thing in your head is making you—" "Security." The word came out as a bark. 2 military police entered immediately. "Major Edwards is suffering from combat stress disorder. Restrain him." "Sir?" The lead MP looked confused. Edwards was a senior officer, respected throughout the ship. "He's physically interfering with combat operations during a critical mission phase. Restrain him, now." Edwards tried to pull me away from the console, but the MPs moved in. He was older than them, stronger than one of them, but not both. They pulled his arms behind his back, though their faces showed they hated doing it. "Jakob, please." Edwards struggled against their grip. "Look at what you're about to do. Look at their names on the screen. You know these men." The names tried to penetrate, but the implant converted them instantly. Numbers, variables, data points in a calculation that had only one solution. 30 seconds until they reached the sappers, the tactical officer reported. Carter, I said into the comm, you have your orders. Sir, I need you to say it clearly, for the record. Lieutenant Carter, target our retreating rearguard at the designated coordinates. Destroy them. Create a defensive barrier to protect the sapper team. This is a direct order. There was 2 seconds of silence. Then Carter's voice came back, steady and certain. Command, this is Blade 1. Order received and understood. Target solution is locked. We will create the wall. On the tactical display, I watched Carter's tanks adjust their turrets. The retreating soldiers were still running, still trying to reach safety. They had no idea what was about to happen. The implant counted down the seconds to optimal firing solution. Jakub. Edwards had stopped struggling, his voice dropping to something raw and desperate. You can still stop this. Please, those men trust you. Their trust is irrelevant. Their function is what matters. You're going to murder them. I'm going to repurpose them. The distinction felt important. They're going to die anyway. This way, their deaths have tactical value. Main guns aligned, Carter reported. Firing in 5, 4. Edwards made one last attempt to break free, nearly pulling the MPs off balance. Stop. Colonel Martel, I hereby relieve you of command on grounds of 3, 2. The implant sent waves of certainty through my nervous system. This was correct. This was optimal. This was the only solution that preserved the mission. Fire, Carter said. The tactical display lit up with impact markers. High explosive shells designed to crack bunkers slammed into our own retreating forces. The first salvo obliterated 30 soldiers instantly, their biosigns switching from yellow to black in less than a second. The second salvo caught those who tried to scatter. The third created the barrier we needed, a wall of destroyed armor, equipment, and organic matter that would shield the sappers for the required 4 minutes. On the display, the enemy forces had stopped their advance, confused by our apparent self-destruction. The sappers continued their work, protected by the barrier of our own dead. It's working, someone whispered. It's actually working. Of course it's working. Carter's voice came through with something like awe. The colonel saw the whole board. He made the only call that could save the mission. 217 biosigns were black now. The implant helpfully calculated the resource cost, approximately 3.2 million credits in training and equipment, 47 years of combined combat experience. Acceptable losses for a successful breach of Voidgate's secondary relay. Sappers report 60 seconds to breach completion, the tactical officer said. His voice was shocked into pure function. Maintain overwatch, I ordered. Have medical teams standing by for the sappers' extraction. What about survivors from the rearguard? Someone asked. I checked the display. There are no survivors. The barrier required complete coverage. Edwards had gone limp in the MP's grip, staring at me with an expression I couldn't categorize. The implant tried to analyze it. Grief, horror, disgust. But none of the labels quite fit. It was the look of a man watching someone he knew transform into something he didn't recognize. Take Major Edwards to his quarters, I said. He's relieved of duty pending psychological evaluation. As they dragged him toward the door, Edwards spoke one last time. I'll make sure they know. High Command, the crew, everyone. I'll make sure they know what that thing turned you into. The only thing they'll know, I replied, is that we succeeded where every other commander failed. The door sealed behind them. On the tactical display, the sappers completed their breach. The secondary relay exploded in a shower of exotic particles that would cripple Voidgate's defensive grid for days. We'd won. The equation had balanced. Outstanding work, Colonel, Carter transmitted. I've never seen tactical genius like that. You did what needed to be done. I stood at the command console, watching the biosigns of the rearguard remain black, while the sappers' signs blinked green as they extracted successfully. The math was perfect. The mission was accomplished. The acceptable loss threshold had been exceeded by 823%, but the strategic value made it worthwhile. The barrier held for exactly 4 minutes and 13 seconds before beginning to dissolve under enemy fire. By then, it had served its purpose. By then, 217 soldiers had been converted from failed variables into successful constants. The math was beautiful. The math was all that mattered. The commendation from High Command arrived 14 hours after the breach. I stood alone in my ready room, reading their transmission on the main display. Exceptional tactical innovation, they called it. A new paradigm in acceptable force application. They were promoting me to Brigadier General, effective immediately. They wanted me to train other commanders in what they termed the Martel method. I filed the commendation without ceremony and pulled up the day's casualty reports. 0300 hours, my usual time for this ritual. The ship was quiet except for the constant low-frequency vibration from our position near the black hole, a sound that had become indistinguishable from silence. The list was longer than usual. 243 entries from the assault. Another 12 from secondary operations. I began my review, the old habit still intact even if its substance had evolved. Asset 77 Alpha through Asset 77 Omega. Combat efficiency ratings ranging from 45% to 78%. Ammunition expenditure within acceptable parameters. Equipment recovery unfeasible due to barrier configuration requirements. The data flowed past in clean lines, each entry tagged with resource allocation codes and replacement timelines. The regiment would be back to full strength in 6 days once the replacement packages arrived from the core worlds. I scrolled through the entries, my mind automatically calculating the statistical impact on our next operation. We'd need to adjust patrol rotations to compensate for the experience deficit in the replacement units. The implant had already generated 17 different configuration options, each with their own efficiency ratings. Near the bottom of the list, an anomaly caught my attention. Asset 95 Foxtrot, terminated due to command-related complications. That was unusual phrasing. I pulled up the full file. The asset had been a 48-year-old male, 15 years of service, multiple commendations for logistics management. Termination had occurred at 22:47 hours in officer quarters. Method: cervical fracture consistent with security restraint protocol. Authorization: Colonel J. Martel, per Article 7 of Combat Efficiency Maintenance Regulations. Article 7, the regulation that allowed summary execution of personnel whose actions threaten mission success during critical operations. I'd apparently authorized it, though I had no specific memory of the event. The implant assured me this was normal. Decisions made in optimal flow state often bypassed conscious memory formation to maximize processing efficiency. I closed the file and moved to the next entry. Asset 96 Alpha, lost during a hull breach in Sector Echo. Asset 96 Beta, systems failure during EVA operations. The list continued, each entry a clean data point in the ongoing calculation of war. Corporal Nash appeared in my doorway. No, that was wrong. I checked the personnel roster. Nash had been transferred to psychiatric ward 6 days ago after his paranoid episode. The person in my doorway was Corporal Willis, his replacement. Similar height and build, which explained the momentary confusion. Sir, we're receiving priority traffic from High Command. They want a full briefing on the barrier tactic. Schedule it for 0800 hours. Include Lieutenant Carter in the briefing. His execution was flawless. Yes, sir. Also, sir. Willis hesitated. The crew has started calling it something. The barrier tactic. They're calling it the Butcher's Wall. The implant analyzed the phrase for emotional content, finding fear, respect, and revulsion in approximately equal measures. An effective psychological marker that would enhance unit cohesion through shared trauma response. An acceptable designation, I said. Willis left, and I returned to the casualty list. 3 more entries, all standard equipment failures. The morning's review was nearly complete. I pulled up the tactical display. Voidgate loomed in the center, wounded but not dead. We'd need at least 7 more major operations to crack it completely. The implant began calculating casualty projections, between 3,000 and 4,000 personnel, depending on variables. Acceptable losses for complete victory. Nash had been wrong about the implant making decisions for me. It didn't make decisions, it revealed the only decisions that mattered. The math was always there, waiting. I just needed the right tool to see it. I pulled up tomorrow's assault plans. The implant had already identified optimal breach points, calculated approach vectors, established loss thresholds. Everything was ready. All I had to do was execute. I began reviewing the plans, each detail sliding into place with perfect clarity. In 6 hours, I'd send another 300 personnel toward Voidgate. Approximately 70 would survive. The math said that was acceptable. Outside my viewport, the black hole bent light around the fortress, creating a halo effect that made the fortress seem to exist in multiple places at once. An optical illusion caused by gravitational lensing, but I thought it looked appropriate. A monument to the mathematics of sacrifice, floating in a place where normal physics went to die. I turned back to my console and continued working. There were efficiencies to calculate, variables to balance, and acceptable losses to define. The work would continue until Voidgate fell, or the regiment ceased to exist. Those were the only 2 endpoints the equation allowed.